Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming on this rainy Saturday morning. My name is Ana Janevski, and I'm a curator in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. But VHV invited me to curate this session here about the Cineclubs in Yugoslavia, and I'm going to tell you more very soon. And we are also very honored that Želimir Žilnik is here with us today, so he also is joining the group with Sarita, who is also his partner and producer and really a crucial person in organizing this exhibition. So I'm going to tell you about my session and then generally a bit about the show. And somehow this session here, sorry, I never did a tour with the mask. So this session here is basically somehow, let's say, the genealogy or where everything started. You know, like where did Žilnik and many of the filmmakers at the time had their first camera? How did they make their first film? So in Yugoslavia in the 50s, as it has this special position, like in respect to the East and to the West, in the 50s, there was this impetus or somehow distributing technology and making technology available to all population. And so in the 50s, there is also a moment when Cineclubs emerged, which were like, of course, state financed. And it was an occasion for everyone who was interested in film to come and make a film with a 16 or 8 millimeters. And usually there were like many young people who were like passionate by film, not necessarily studying film. Žilnik himself, he studied law, and many of the other filmmakers were studying something else. But they were like really passionate about film. They were because of Yugoslavia being open internationally, they had really the possibility of also seeing many international films from the, you know, like Russian avant-garde, German expressionism, nouvelle vague, Italian neorealism. So they were like really absorbing films and generally had the opportunity to really be, to really knowing what is happening in the world at the same times in terms of like literature, in terms also of theater, in terms of music. So they had this opportunity to come to those cineclubs and, as I said, really make their own films. And the cineclubs were distributed really all over the country throughout Yugoslavia. But we decided for this section to only focus on 4. So it's the Cineclub Split on this first monitor, Zagreb and Belgrade, and here is Ljubljana. Želimir Žilnik is from Novi Sad, and he started actually his film career in the Cineclub of Novi Sad, but unfortunately the material from Novi Sad haven't been preserved, so we were not able to show some of his first films. But yesterday I asked him about his films in the period of the Cineclub, and he told me, so we can ask him a little bit later. So we decided to focus on those 4 Cineclubs because they were really very prolific. And it's also important to say that they were also very connected. Želimir had the opportunity to see them. He was running at the time, in the beginning of the 60s, this youth center called Youth Tribune, and there were organized screenings of this, what they were called at the time, amateur film director, or amateur films. And the whole idea of Amateurism is very important for the entire show. It's somehow how the show is framed, because Žilnik also worked with amateur actors. So this idea of like what is an amateur, of like being non-professional or someone who is not, you know, opposed to consumerism, or actually amateur intended as a kind of freedom, or the freedom to experiment, the freedom to work. And as you can see from this quote here, the fact of being in the amateur film and doing things with just basically with a camera and your friends, you know, and people who you will find around, it was a tool of freedom, of understanding how to get out of like bureaucratic labyrinths and then make your own film. And so those films you know, let's say every Cineclub, but every author also had its own somehow genre, or has its own way to interpret what is amateur, experimental, or underground film, because those films somehow were really also challenging the conventional notion of the film language, what was a usual film, you know, like with narrative, no narrative. Definitely there were no like feature film. So we also, like as I said, each Cineclub has its own monitor, because there were also different way of interpreting that. In the middle we have the Cineclub Zagreb, which it's also important for this vitrine and some of the material that you can see here, because it was founded in the 50s, and one of the main figure was Mihovil Pansini, who was a physician himself. He was a doctor, but super passionate about film. And with other of his peers, they started thinking about the notion of the anti-film. And here you have a quote about the anti-film, which was somehow a film that was like a negation of a, you know, of a film, of the author, of the narration, of any rules. Very much thinking about also about chance, of like a very like structural, let's say, approach. And here you can see, for example, one of the example, it's a Vladimir Petek film called Encounters, of like filming this beautiful woman and then inserting other material. So it was really like how you can work the media. And you know, so from this idea of the anti-film, there was this book that you will be able to see here, which was called Anti-Film and Us. They were like really developing all these ideas. And from these discussions, there was a festival that was founded in 1963. Festivals were really important throughout former Yugoslavia, because this was a way of showing film, distributing film, of meeting, discussing. And we decided to focus on GEF, because it was a festival that happened in 63, 65, 67, and 70. And it was an extremely rich festival of like gathering really all those amateur filmmakers at the time, but also filmmakers, artists, cultural workers, and also very international crowd. For example, Adam Sitney, who is considered a film critic from New York, who somehow coined the term structural film, came also to Zagreb in the 60s. And also this was a very prolific time, rich time in culture, as I said, but particularly in Zagreb, because there was a moment of the music biennial that was happening in Zagreb. And for example, John Cage came and see as one of the guests, or even New Tendencies, which was an art event that was happening every 2 years. So there was like this very like vivid cultural scene. GEF started to happen, and they were like showing film by Andy Warhol, Yoko Ono, Karoli Schneemann. So it was like really an important festival. And so we decided to somehow show this material. Every edition of the festival had another theme, and the 70s was dedicated to sexuality. So we laid out those newspapers, and those who are native speaker could understand. But it was also a collaboration, for example, with very famous graphic designer Mihovil Arsovsky, and you can see this is one of the images of one of the invitation for the GEF festival. So it was really a moment when like all these like cultural movements and energies are like intertwining. For example, you see this is one of Karyokineza. This is this example like burning the film. So it was like really working, as I said, in the Cineclub Zagreb with the medium. And for example, Tomislav Gotovac, who then became an important artist and performer, he also started there. The first one is, as I said, is the Cineclub Split, which was Split, as you may know, is a city on the sea, and they had a different approach, which is also very structural, but also very, it was called like filming in a frame. So it was mainly focused on the city and like the energy of the city, a little bit also as essentialistic, you know, like young people walking after spending a night outside. And one of the major figure in the Cineclub Split was Ivan Martinac, who was an architect himself. But he was really very devoted and did many films very much focused on the city itself. And if you spend some more time, you could see some of his very interesting film that he did at the time. The Cineclub Belgrade had a completely, let's say, different approach. And you can see this quote from Dusan Makavejev, who's a very well-known filmmaker, also very close to Žilnik, who also he studied psychology at the time, for example, and also started with the Cineclub. And they were more somehow thinking about what is the power of the cinema, or how the cinema of the film, how film actually can be more a tool for addressing social issues. And so they were more prone to film that had some, like, you know, influences of German expressionism or like the realism. So it's always, there is no so much interest in experimenting with the medium itself. You see, this is like a very kind of a surreal moment, but they were more focused on really showing what is the reality, or what the reality can be, with very like surreal and psychological, let's say, approaches. And the fourth Cineclub is from Ljubljana, and we decided to only focus on one filmmaker, Karpo Godina, who was in his early 20s when he was part of the Cineclub Ljubljana. And the reason why we only focus on Karpo Godina is because when Želimir Žilnik saw his film on one of the festivals, one of those early films, he was very impressed, and he called him to be his cinematographer on his film early works. And this is what really famously the beginning of a long friendship that is still going on today. And so with Karpo is doing like this, like basically one frame after another, like this, like very fast motion images. And you know, there is this impetus of taking the camera and basically filming what you can see around, and something that it was also important for Žilnik in this, what would become like his docu-fiction, you know, his particular way of like working with amateur and working like with the world around him. So we decided really, because Želimir Žilnik said many times that this is also, when you look at this show, it's like 50 years of friendship, and somehow the relationship with Karpo from this moment, it's a friendship that is still going on. So it was important to continue it. And this session, as I said, it's somehow where everything started in a way, because this was important to think about this moment when basically you have the camera, you have the film available, and you have a certain freedom. Mihovil Pansini, who was the founder of anti-film and like one of the initiators, he has this quote that I like very much. He says, the amateur can ask forbidden questions and give illicit answers. So you really you were able to create this space, basically, of working in your own way, in experimenting, in trying many things. Also knowing that the cinema industry in Yugoslavia at the time was very developed, was very, very important, and they were like, you know, very also high cost and like big production feature film happening. And the interesting thing is that most of those, for example, Dusan Makavejev or Živojin Pavlović, they became really known and important filmmakers, starting this new Yugoslav wave cinema, or Lordan Zafranović, who is there, also became a filmmaker. Želimir himself, Karpo, became an important cinematographer, but also filmmaker. So this possibility of really being part of the Cineclubs, it was really also, it was like a trigger. It was really a springboard for becoming a filmmaker. So, you know, because as I said, they were studying other things, and this gave really the impetus, let's say. As we have this huge privilege to have Želimir here with us, I would invite him maybe just to say a few things about his experience in the Cineclub, and why was important to frame his also work in the exhibition in this way. And then after I can tell you a little bit more about the show, but as I'm not one of the curators, won't be too in the details, but just to give you an overview then how to continue. So Želimir.
Good morning. Well, actually, you explained a lot of things in the whole frame of this movement, but I can recall some of my memories. When I was 20 years old, I first time came to watch the production of Amateurism. I myself did not start to be a member of the club, but I have seen how Yugoslav amateur films coming from Belgrade, Zagreb, Split, how they are so much more open to the visual approach, that is first, second, to the various characters and subjects, much different than official cinematography. In our country, like in all socialistic countries, cinema was a very, very important part of cultural politics, and the roots of this importance come deep down in Lenin time. After Russian Revolution, Lenin proclaimed that the cinema is the most important tool for art and education. Why? Because in Soviet Union, which is this huge, the biggest country in the world, there have been a lot of class differences between the big cities and wealthy people, educated people, people educated on the west from the upper class, and the peasants. And many, huge amount of population could not read and write. So, Soviet Revolution, through the cinema tools, they have been spreading these, let us say, ideas, plans, and parolas. So you know that they have had this movement of the cinema trains going all over the country, and then somehow spreading education about, you know, agriculture and health, and also the new. So that idea is embraced also in this socialistic Yugoslavia. So one of the first actually forming on the big companies in Yugoslavia just after the liberation, that means in 44, you see, was making the film studios. We have found even documents that in Belgrade, which was liberated on 20th October, on the 1st November, they made a film studio to start. That is this idea. But of course, in film studios, they could not engage much of these previous artists from King's time, because the cinema industry was very weak. Maybe altogether, I think 5 films was made in 20 years. So in many cases, they have engaged actually these activists and partisans. Many of them have had some international experience in actually France, and especially during the Civil War in Spain. So in the film studios, they have been actually not only the skilled people, but also somehow a high level appreciated actually politicians. So for us young, and that is the reason that the main of the film production was actually sort of propaganda. Luckily, Yugoslavia split with the Soviet Union ideologically. So also our culture was open, and also film studios have been very open for co-production. So that was far away from my generation. We thought, who knows when we will be able to work in those studios. But when we went in the kino clubs, I entered kino club in '63. What was the atmosphere there? First of all, there was focus on technology, as film technology is very complicated. It needs, first of all, negative film. Then this negative has where to buy it. It is produced only in the United States, some in Italy, and maybe some in Netherlands. How to get it, that is first. Second, of course, in Kino Club, they taught us how to develop the film. So even if you do with 16 millimeters small film, this is 16 millimeters real, but it is 110 minutes of material, 110 minutes, you see, 10 meters, 111 minutes, but 110 meters. So if you film it in 10 minutes, then you have huge material to develop. We didn't have any machines. We have had a big pots like this, you see, and then you have to do it in the dark. So it's very complicated. And who have been our teachers? Old-fashioned photographs. Many of them who have been in previous time these private photographs.
Family photo, yeah.
You see. But they have been very skilled. So they have been shouting on us actually to learn this technology. They did not mind what would be our objects, what we film, you see. And that is the reason why all these very free experimental films have been made. Because they say, I need to see how do you film on the sunlight. Go on the sunlight and film on the sunlight. Because on the sunlight you have to adjust, you see, blend and everything. And another will shout, go and film with teleobjective. I want to see how you do sharpness and so on. So we have been completely in this technical stuff, and then of course each of us was choosing something what he has in his soul and in his emotions, you see. Many of those youngsters have been obsessed, with this, let us say, youth love affairs and getting falling in love. This man, he was already a very famous doctor. He was 40 years old. For us, Pazzini. For us, he was old man, but he was much more, I would say, in some influence, being influenced by neorealism of Italian people. You see, then some of those people have been influenced by visual art, because our great director, Želimir Žilnik, he studied visual art and he finished with it. You see, so that is what was my experience. That actually, first of all, luckily, in 1 year, you could learn many things what on academy. Maybe it is just some portion of the lessons, you see, and that is this technology. So we amateurs came with tremendous good experience in our head in hand. That is the reason why actually when I start making long films, professional films, I actually rely on cameramen who have been together with me in amateur clubs. You see, I knew when I called this man from Ljubljana, Karpo, I said, Karpo, come here, I have now opportunity to make a long film on 35 millimeters. He said, okay, I never filmed with 35 millimeters, but it must be the same as the 16. I said, don't worry, because you will get also assistance. But what we knew, so we could speak in this technical term. I can say, we see this girl, film her with 50, objective 50. So we directly knew that it is, she will be filmed up to here. And this girl, you film her with 80. So we know that this objective 80. That is this. Also something what I would tell you young people, although maybe it is boring to hear. Now you are living in freedom in terms of technology. Every one of you can use telephone and small cameras make a film. But what many of you do not do, you do not pass through this training about lights, about objectives, about the frames. So you should do it as it is so easy. It will be much more easier for you if you are secure, if you are confident what's happening when the light is from above. You see what happens when the light is from here, how your face is lightened when you are in shade and so on. That was actually the previous generation where they felt also some sort of restriction to come in the topics and in a sphere which is more provocative. You see, in that whole time there was completely banned any naked scene in the films. I mean, even if just part of the body would be seen on the screen. So he went and he made something actually which is also ironic and symbolic, like this one, and symbolic on two levels. On the ideological level, like one should not believe in the monuments. You see, that is something very nicely put, how actually these monuments are just sometimes a false celebration of something what is not worth. And second is this question of naked human bodies, you see, which was out of the focus.
I want also to tell you that, this, as I said, you could see Žilnik photo here because for the films that he did in the Cineclubs, and unfortunately they're not preserved, he received many of the prizes. He told us yesterday 27 prizes. So that's also, you know, this was like one of the few images that we had of him at the time. This was during the GAF festival. I don't know if you have any question. We try to lay you out the basis to continue then the continue the exhibition. Otherwise, I would just give you a suggestion and just to give you an overview of the show. On the sites you have the short films that Želimir did in the 60s and the 70s, which are really amazing, and they were like, you know, giving this very also special view on Yugoslavia at the time, talking about non-employment, youth, working with amateur actors, and giving also like dealing also with subjects that, you know, at the time the whole idea of progress, of transformation in the socialist Yugoslavia was considered to be something very positive, and he's showing also somehow the dark side, also the other side of the reality. Then in the middle you have those, the show is organized by session, different kind of session or themes, like working class, Gastarbeiter, values. And then on the sides you have his TV production, because of some of his films he had to leave Yugoslavia in the beginning of the 70s, and he went to Germany and stayed for several years, but then he had to leave Germany and he came back to Yugoslavia and started doing film for TV. And also one of the shorter film in 74, it's a film that I haven't seen before, it's the film he did in Germany, and and he had to leave because of that film, so I highly recommend that one. And then there is the section over there which is more about his female characters, which is also something that haven't been really tackled so far. So as it's really, it's a very dense and rich and beautiful material, I suggest you to maybe start from the sites and then go more into the middle, or just like find your way and come back, because there are so many good things to see. So if you don't have any question, I thank you so much for being with us, and please enjoy the show. Okay. Thank you.
We met in Bucharest a long time ago.
Yeah, you look very familiar.